The courtroom was cold, not just because of the overpowering air conditioning, but because of the suffocating weight of tension filling the room. Harper could feel the eyes of dozens of people on her, some filled with pity, others merely curious to witness the spectacle of a scandalous divorce. At the center of this storm sat Benjamin, her ex-husband, his posture rigid, his suit impeccable, and that look of superiority she knew all too well. Beside him, Madison wore a subtle smile, as if she already knew how the trial would end. A little farther away, but just as venomous, Jennifer, Harper's former mother-in-law, kept her arms crossed, her face locked in an expression of pure disdain. Benjamin's attorney began speaking with the confidence of someone who believed this was an easy victory. "My client has suffered due to Ms. Harper Bennett's financial demands," she said, emphasizing the name as if it were an accusation. "Her request for alimony and division of assets is nothing short of an abuse of a marriage that clearly had ceased to exist years ago." Harper kept her face impassive. Benjamin's old tactic, paint himself as the victim, flip the narrative. She had expected this. "Furthermore," the attorney continued, "we have evidence that Ms. Bennett did not contribute financially to the marriage. While my client worked tirelessly, she devoted herself to her hobbies." The word was laced with venom. Hobbies. As if Harper's art, her passion, was nothing more than a worthless pastime. Benjamin folded his fingers together on the table, pretending neutrality, but his eyes said it all. He believed he had already won. The judge turned to Harper and her attorney. "Would you like to respond, Ms. Bennett?" She took a deep breath. She was no longer the woman who lowered her head for Benjamin. "Yes, Your Honor." Her attorney stood and walked to the central table, where a manila envelope rested among the case documents. He opened it carefully and pulled out a stack of stapled papers. "We present to the court a series of documents that completely contradict Mr. Benjamin Carter's claims." Madison's confident smile faltered. Jennifer exchanged a quick glance with her son. Benjamin, however, remained still, except for the slight clench of his jaw. The attorney continued. "Here, we have bank statements proving that Ms. Bennett paid for half of the couple's expenses, contrary to what was alleged. Additionally," he picked up another document and handed it to the judge, "we have a list of hidden properties and investments acquired by Mr. Carter during the marriage, without my client's knowledge." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Benjamin unfolded his fingers and leaned forward, the first genuine sign of discomfort. But Harper wasn't finished. "And I would also like to present," she said, her voice steady, "evidence of my ex-husband's infidelities, including messages, emails, and hotel records." The silence that followed was deafening. Madison stiffened, her air of superiority vanishing in seconds. Jennifer's eyes widened as she stared at her son like he was a stranger. As for Benjamin, he couldn't hide the fury rising within him. The judge flipped through the documents before looking at Benjamin. "Mr. Carter, would you like to respond to these accusations?" His fists tightened. When he spoke, his voice was tense. "This is a complete distortion of the facts." "The court will determine what is and isn't a distortion," the judge said impatiently. "For now, the evidence speaks for itself." Harper felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It no longer mattered what Benjamin said or did. He had been exposed. The final ruling came minutes later. The court decided in Harper's favor, granting her a fair share of the assets and officially closing that chapter of her life. Benjamin stormed out, Madison trailing behind him, unable to hide her humiliation. Jennifer said nothing. She only cast one last cold glance at Harper before leaving. Outside, Harper felt the breeze against her face. For the first time in a long while, she took a deep breath without feeling a knot in her chest. She had won. But victory was only the beginning. What came next was still a mystery. Rain pattered against the window of Harper's small studio, creating a rhythmic sound that filled the silence of the room. She held a paintbrush between her fingers, staring at the blank canvas before her. It was the first time in years that she allowed herself to return to her art without guilt or fear. During her marriage, Benjamin had made her believe that painting was a waste of time. But now, in this moment, only the promise of a fresh start mattered. The persistent ringing of her phone broke her concentration. Harper blinked a few times before answering. "Harper Bennett?" The voice on the other end was formal, male. "Yes, this is she." My name is Tyler Beaumont. I got your contact through a recommendation. I'd like to hire you for a job." She frowned, surprised. "What kind of job?" "A portrait of my son." The offer caught Harper off guard. It had been a long time since anyone had commissioned her work, and Tyler Beaumont wasn't just anyone. He was an influential businessman, owner of multiple companies, and his name frequently appeared in the news. "Can we meet in person?" he suggested. Harper hesitated for a moment, but the truth was she needed the money, and more than that, she needed to get back to doing what she loved. "Of course. When?" "Tomorrow. My house. I'll send you the address." He hung up without further pleasantries. A bit curt, but Harper didn't mind. She had a feeling this job would change everything. The next day, Harper found herself standing in front of the massive iron gates of the Beaumont estate. The property was impressive, with meticulously maintained gardens and a classic architectural design. As the gate opened, she walked up to the main entrance, where a staff member guided her inside. The mansion had a cold, imposing air. The marble floors gleamed beneath her feet, and the hallways felt too long, as if they were hiding secrets within their walls. Tyler Beaumont greeted her in the grand hall. He was a tall man with an intense gaze, dressed impeccably but without excessive flamboyance. There was a quiet weight of concern in his demeanor. "Mr. Beaumont," Harper greeted. "Just Tyler." He gestured toward a sofa. "Thank you for coming." She nodded, still taking in her surroundings. "Is Charles home?" Tyler exhaled, running a hand over his face. "Yes, but he's not fond of visitors. He has been more withdrawn lately." Before Harper could ask anything further, a presence made itself known in the room. A woman descended the staircase slowly, each step deliberate. Dressed in blue silk, a sparkling necklace resting against her collarbone, she had the cold beauty of a sculpture. Her gaze assessed Harper with cruel indifference. "I wasn't aware we'd be having a guest today." Her voice was soft, yet laced with venom. "Madeline," Tyler said, his tone devoid of emotion. "This is Harper Bennett. She'll be painting Charles's portrait." Madeline's eyes narrowed slightly before she offered a thin, insincere smile. "How interesting. I hope you managed to get him to open up. He doesn't usually trust strangers." "I'll do my best," Harper replied calmly. Madeline said nothing more. She simply cast one last glance at Tyler before walking out of the room with the same practiced elegance. Tyler sighed. "Don't mind her. Madeline can be difficult." Harper didn't respond. There was something about that woman that unsettled her, and she had a feeling this was only the beginning. The first time Harper saw Charles, he was sitting alone on a bench in the garden, his eyes fixed on a worn-out book cover. The wind tousled his brown hair, and he seemed completely oblivious to her presence. Tyler led her toward him but stopped at a certain distance. "Charles," he called cautiously. The boy lifted his gaze slowly, as if emerging from a trance. His deep brown eyes were expressive but carried an unusual melancholy for a child. When he saw Harper, his body tensed. "This is Harper Bennett," Tyler introduced. "She's here to paint your portrait." Charles didn't respond immediately. He simply closed the book and held it against his chest, as if it were a shield. "I don't need a portrait." His voice was quiet, but firm. Tyler sighed and crouched to be at his son's level. "I just want you to try, son. For me." The boy averted his gaze, clearly uncomfortable. Harper realized that pushing him wouldn't help, so she simply smiled. "You don't have to decide now. We can take it slow." He looked at her cautiously, weighing her words, then gave a small nod before heading back inside the house. Tyler ran a hand through his hair, looking exhausted. "I'm sorry about that. He hasn't been himself since—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Since my wife passed away." Harper felt a tightness in her chest. "I understand. I just need time for him to trust me." Tyler nodded, seeming grateful. "If anyone can do it, I think it's you." She wasn't sure if he said that out of hope or desperation, maybe a little of both. The Beaumont mansion had an eerie silence, as if the hallways absorbed sound. Harper began setting up her workspace, an improvised studio in a room overlooking the garden. As she arranged her paints and canvases, she felt eyes on her. Turning around, she found Franklin Beaumont standing at the doorway, leaning on his cane. His aged but sharp eyes studied her with interest. "So, you're the artist," he said with a half-smile. "And you must be Tyler's father," Harper replied, smiling back. Franklin stepped inside slowly, settling into a nearby armchair. "Tyler told me about you. He thinks you might be able to help Charles. I'm not a therapist, Mr. Beaumont. I just want him to feel comfortable enough to pose for the portrait. And do you think you will?" Harper didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the blank canvas. "I think Charles needs someone to really see him, and I'm good at observing." Franklin chuckled as if she had just said something amusing. "I like you, Harper. And from what I've seen, Madeline doesn't." She lifted her eyes to him, surprised by his bluntness. "I noticed. Madeline likes to keep things under control. You're a new element, and new elements disrupt the established order." There was something in his words, a hidden meaning. "You don't trust her?" Franklin clasped his fingers over his cane, his smile fading. "Let's just say I've lived long enough to recognize when someone has their own agenda." A chill ran down Harper's spine. "And what's Madeline's agenda?" The old man stared at her for a long moment before answering. "I'm still trying to figure that out." That night, Harper was walking through the mansion's hallways when she heard muffled voices coming from Tyler's office. The door was slightly ajar, and the dim light cast shadows into the corridor. "You need to sign this soon." Madeline's voice was cold and impatient. "I told you I need time," Tyler responded, tension evident. "Time? Tyler, you know you can't afford that luxury." A heavy silence followed before Tyler spoke again, his voice quieter. "This affects my company, my future." Madeline sighed, exasperated. "And what do you think will happen if you lose everything? Do you think Charles will be safe?" Hearing Charles's name made Harper hold her breath. "I just want to protect my family, Tyler. But for that, you need to trust me." The sound of papers being placed on the desk followed. "Think it over," Madeline said before footsteps echoed toward the door. Harper quickly stepped away, pretending she was merely passing through the hallway. When Madeline emerged, their eyes met for a brief moment. The woman arched an eyebrow, studying her before continuing down the hall. Harper's heart pounded. Something was wrong, and she needed to find out what. The atmosphere in the Beaumont mansion seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Harper noticed Madeline's cold stares, Tyler's prolonged silences, and Charles's constant unease. But what troubled her the most were the words she had overheard that night in the office. She tried to ignore it, to convince herself that it wasn't her concern, but she couldn't. Something was happening in this house, and Charles was caught in the middle of it. That afternoon, as she mixed paints for the portrait, she sensed a presence behind her. Turning slowly, she found Charles standing at the doorway of her improvised studio. "Can you teach me?" The question was so unexpected that Harper took a few seconds to respond. "Teach you to paint?" He nodded, hesitant. "Of course," she said, stepping aside so he could come closer. Charles walked in slowly, his shoulders tense as if preparing for something difficult. Harper handed him a brush and pointed to the blank canvas beside hers. "Don't worry about making something beautiful. Just feel the paint." He frowned, thoughtful, and dipped the brush into the blue. He spread the color across the canvas, creating abstract shapes with no defined pattern. For several minutes, he worked in silence, immersed in the process. "Do you like art?" Harper asked gently. Charles hesitated before answering. "My mum did." Harper felt the weight of those words. "Did she paint too?" "No, but she liked watching. She used to say every painting told a secret." Harper smiled. "I think she was right." Charles looked at his painting, deep in thought. "Do you think she would like this one?" Harper glanced at the canvas, filled with blended, chaotic yet intense colors. "I'm sure she would." It was the first time she saw Charles smile. Later, Harper decided to explore the mansion a bit more. She had the strange feeling that this place held more secrets than it let on. She wandered through the silent hallways until she found the library, a luxurious room with bookshelves stretching from floor to ceiling. The golden light of the setting sun filtered through the large windows, casting a warm glow over the antique furniture. She ran her fingers along the books when Franklin's voice spoke from behind her. Beautiful, isn't it? She turned to find the old man sitting in an armchair, watching her with interest. I hear you have a habit of uncovering secrets, he commented, clasping his hands over his cane. Harper smiled cautiously. I just like to understand where I'm stepping. Franklin chuckled. Good answer. He gestured for her to sit, and Harper obliged. You've noticed, haven't you, he asked. Madeline is plotting something. I heard her and Tyler arguing, something about documents and losing money. Franklin nodded slowly. Madeline wants control, she always has. Harper studied him, trying to decipher his words. Do you know what she's doing? The old man took a deep breath. Not yet. But I know what she's capable of. He paused before continuing. Her father was a criminal. Money laundering, fraud. I refused to defend him in court years ago. Madeline never forgave me for that. A chill ran down Harper's spine. And you think she wants revenge? Franklin smiled, but his eyes were dark. I think Madeline never does anything without a reason. Harper remained silent, absorbing the information. If Madeline was playing a dangerous game, she needed to learn the rules before it was too late. The cold wind whistled through the corridors of the Beaumont mansion, making the curtains sway gently. Harper had barely slept that night. Her conversation with Franklin echoed in her mind like a constant warning. Madeline was playing a dangerous game, and Tyler was the key piece. But the real question was, what was her checkmate? The next morning, Harper decided she needed to find proof. If Madeline was scheming against Tyler, it was only a matter of time before it was too late to stop her. She began observing. Small details that once seemed insignificant now stood out, like the way Madeline always appeared when Tyler and Charles were together, as if she wanted to mark her presence, or the way she spoke to the house staff with absolute superiority, as if she were the true owner of this place. But the final piece came that afternoon. Harper was in the studio, working on Charles's portrait, when she heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. Charles appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide, as if he had just seen a ghost. What is it? Harper asked, concerned. The boy hesitated, biting his lip. I saw Madeline taking something from my dad's office. Harper's heartbeat quickened. What did she take? Some papers. She looked like she was in a hurry. When she saw me, she told me to leave. Harper immediately stood up. Charles, I need you to stay here. The boy nodded, still shaken, as Harper stepped out of the studio and made her way down the hallway. Tyler's office was at the end of the east wing, an imposing mahogany door that at that moment was slightly ajar. She paused in front of the door, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The office was steeped in an oppressive silence. The furniture was dark wood, and the shelves were filled with neatly arranged folders and books. Harper scanned the room, searching for anything out of place. The desk was a mess, papers scattered as if someone had searched through them in a hurry. Harper stepped closer and began sifting through the documents. Contracts, reports. Nothing seemed suspicious, until she found a brown envelope tossed in the corner of the desk. She opened it and felt her stomach drop. Asset transfer papers. It was a contract that, if signed by Tyler, would give Madeline control over a significant portion of the Beaumont family's wealth. Harper stepped back, her breath quickening. So that was it. Madeline didn't just want control over the house or over Tyler. She wanted his money, his empire. Snooping where you shouldn't be? The cold voice came from the doorway. Harper froze. Turning slowly, she found Madeline standing there, arms crossed, a venomous smile on her lips. What exactly are you doing here, Harper? She took a steady breath, masking her nerves. I was looking for Tyler. Madeline tilted her head, assessing her. Oh, of course, and does he hide in drawers now? Harper's heart pounded against her ribs, but she held her gaze firm. Charles told me he saw you taking papers from here. Madeline's smile faltered for a brief second, but then it returned, sharper than before. Charles has a vivid imagination. She took a step forward, slowly closing the distance. You're an artist, Harper, not a detective. Stay out of things you don't understand. Harper held her ground. And what exactly is it that I don't understand? Madeline's smile vanished completely. That I always get what I want. And if you keep sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, I can assure you, It won't be any different this time. The warning was clear, but Harper wasn't the type to back down. She merely smiled, a defiant gleam in her eyes. "We'll see about that." Madeline narrowed her eyes as if calculating her next move, but then without another word, she turned and walked out of the office, her heels echoing down the hallway. Harper let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had just declared war and she couldn't afford to lose. The rain began to fall, thick and heavy, as Harper locked herself inside the studio that night. Her heart was still pounding from her confrontation with Madeleine. She wouldn't back down, but she knew that without concrete evidence, her suspicions were just empty words against a woman skilled at manipulating Tyler. She needed something more, something undeniable. That's when an idea struck her. Franklin had already warned her that Madeleine was dangerous. If she was truly orchestrating a scheme, at some point, she would slip up. Harper just needed to be ready to catch her. The next morning, she went to see the old man. She found him in the garden, sitting in an iron chair beneath a sprawling tree. "You have that look, like you figured something out," Franklin said before she could even speak. Harper sat beside him, holding the brown envelope she had found in Tyler's office. "Madeleine wants Tyler to sign this." Franklin took the papers and examined them with the patience of someone who had seen many suspicious contracts in his lifetime. After a few moments, he let out a short laugh. "Very clever, but not clever enough." "What do you mean?" He pointed to one of the clauses. "If Tyler signs this, he'll be transferring a significant portion of his company to a newly formed subsidiary. But if you look into that subsidiary, I'd bet anything it's controlled by someone connected to Madeleine." A chill ran down Harper's spine. "Which means that by the time Tyler realizes it, it'll be too late. He'll lose everything and Madeleine will be in control." She closed her eyes for a moment. "We have to stop this." Franklin smiled, as if he already knew she would say that. "And what's your plan?" Harper bit her lip, thinking, if Madeleine feels secure, she'll eventually say something incriminating. "What if we had a way to record her?" The old man raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Are you suggesting espionage, Harper?" She gave a mischievous smile. "Let's just say I'm suggesting a little creativity." That night, while everyone slept, Harper slipped into Madeleine's office. She had learned from her days in the mansion that Madeleine often spent hours there, making phone calls that never seemed to be about anything trivial. She had brought a small device with her, a discreet camera that Franklin had arranged through his contacts. Carefully, she placed it in a strategic corner of the bookshelf, nestled between heavy books, with the lens pointed at the desk. Her heart pounded. If she got caught, Madeleine would never forgive her. But Harper wasn't backing down now. She slipped out of the office, making sure nothing seemed out of place. Now, all she had to do was wait. The next day, Charles showed up at the studio earlier than usual. "You seem different," he commented, sitting beside Harper. She smiled as she mixed paints on the palette. "Different how?" "Like you have a secret." Harper laughed. "Maybe I do." He watched her for a moment, then picked up a brush and started painting alongside her. "I like when you're here." The confession was so spontaneous that it caught Harper off guard. She set down her brush and looked at Charles warmly. "I like being here too." The boy shrugged, dipping his brush into the blue paint. "Madeleine doesn't like you," Harper sighed. "I know. She doesn't like my dad either." The words were spoken in such a neutral tone that they sent a chill through Harper. "What do you mean?" Charles stopped painting, staring at the canvas but not really seeing it. "She always says that one day he'll understand he doesn't have a choice." A shiver ran down Harper's spine. Charles's words echoed in her mind, fitting together with everything she already suspected. And now she just needed the final proof. The camera was in place. Now, Harper just had to wait. The next few days felt long. Harper kept to her usual routine at the Beaumont mansion, splitting her time between painting Charles and watching everything around her. But inside, her anxiety grew. At any moment, Madeleine could reveal something incriminating. On the third night, Harper checked the recordings. The office had been empty most of the time, but then, around midnight, the door opened. Madeleine walked in. Harper turned up the volume and held her breath. "Is everything ready?" Madeleine's voice was cold. A second voice, male, responded. "Yes, The contract will be signed at the event. As soon as he signs, the transfer will be processed. Madeline let out a quiet laugh. Tyler has no idea what's coming. The moment he realizes, it'll be too late. He'll lose everything, and I'll finally get what I deserve. A chill ran down Harper's spine. She had the proof she needed. But now came the hardest part, exposing Madeline in front of everyone. The charity gala took place the following night. The mansion was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers bathed the grand ballroom in light, and guests in luxurious attire clinked champagne glasses as they chatted about business and philanthropy. Harper watched everything from a distance, her heart pounding. Franklin stood beside her holding a tablet. "It's all here," he said, referring to the recordings. Tyler, elegant in his black suit, stood in the center of the room, speaking with investors. Near him, Madeline shined like a perfect hostess, dressed in an impeccable red gown, flashing her well-practiced, insincere smiles. The moment was approaching. As the event reached its peak, Madeline stepped closer to Tyler, holding a discreet envelope. "Here's the contract, darling," she said, offering him a gold pen. "Sign it, and we can secure a stable future for the family." Tyler took the papers, unaware of the deception hidden within them. That was when Harper stepped in. "Wait, Tyler, you need to see this first." All eyes turned toward her. Madeline narrowed her gaze. "What do you think you're doing?" Franklin handed Tyler the tablet and pressed play. Madeline's voice echoed through the ballroom. "Tyler has no idea what's coming. The moment he realizes, it'll be too late. He'll lose everything, and I'll finally get what I deserve." Silence fell over the room. Tyler turned pale. He looked at Madeline, disbelief written all over his face. "Is this true?" Madeline tried to recover. "This is ridiculous. That recording is fake." But Harper had anticipated this reaction. "Oh? Then is this fake too?" she asked, pulling out the documents she had found in the office. "This is the contract you wanted him to sign. If he had, everything would have been transferred to your shell company." Madeline's face twisted in fury. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Harper." "No, Madeline," Tyler cut in, his voice cold. "You have no idea who you were dealing with." He tore the contract in half and let the pieces fall to the floor. "It's over." A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Madeline looked around, realizing she had lost. That was when the police entered the ballroom. "Madeline Harrison," one of the officers stepped forward. "You are under investigation for fraud and attempted financial conspiracy. We need you to come with us." She stumbled back, eyes wide in shock. "Tyler, you can't do this to me. I did all of this for us." But he simply stared at her, unmoved. Across the room, Charles reached for Harper's hand, and for the first time she saw the boy smile. The Beaumont mansion could finally breathe again. With Madeline out of the picture, Charles began to open up more. He visited Harper's studio every day, painting alongside her. His gaze, once distant and sad, now held a different kind of light. Tyler, too, seemed lighter. He watched her from a distance, drawn in more and more each day. One night, after putting Charles to bed, he walked into the kitchen where Harper was making tea. "I never thanked you," he said, leaning against the counter. She smiled, pouring him a cup. "You don't have to." He took the cup but kept his eyes on her. "Not just for saving my estate, but for saving my family." Harper felt her heart race. Tyler took a step closer. "You didn't just change this house, Harper. You changed me." A charged silence settled between them. Then, gently, he took her hand. "Stay." She looked at him, then at Charles, peacefully asleep in the next room. For so long, Harper had lived in the shadow of pain and abandonment. But now, standing there in front of a man and a child who saw her as something more, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. "I think I feel it too, Tyler." And that night, between a cup of tea and a new beginning, Harper finally found her home.